14th Amendment, birthright, citizenship, and due process. As is typical of CNN and the majority within the Democrat Party, they often distort the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment had everything to do with slavery, not illegal immigration. Now, CNN posted an article that was entitled, "What the 14th Amendment Says About Birthright Citizenship." It was written by A.J. Willingham. In the article, it says, "It may not be as often quoted as the First Amendment or as contested as the Second Amendment, but the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution plays a critical role in supporting some of our closest held notions of American freedom and equality." Now, realize that CNN is trying to manipulate you all's thinking. But as I said in the beginning, the 14th Amendment had everything to do with slavery, not, I say again, not illegal immigration. So the article goes on to say, for one, it clearly states that American citizenship is a birthright for all people who are born on American soil. That is not true. It only pertained to those who were enslaved and born here in the United States of America. No one else. None of the illegal immigrants. None of them. Something that President Donald Trump has announced he wants to end. Now, that is true. Donald Trump says that he wants to end birthright citizenship. Not only would this unravel 150 years of American law, it would loosen a significant cornerstone of the Constitution's interpretation of American identity. In order to better understand this part of the 14th Amendment, we turned to a pair of experts in constitutional and immigration law, Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of National Constitution Center, and Erica Lee, former Director of Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota. Now, for Erica, she has to realize that illegal immigration had nothing to do with birthright when the 14th Amendment was established. The 14th Amendment, once again, was established based upon slavery. These were people who were brought here by force, and then their children were born to them while here in America. The article goes on to say the amendment has 5 sections, but we will only be dealing with the first, which contains the citizenship clause and 3 other related clauses. Now, they're indicating that we're not going to deal with the whole matter. In other words, you're not going to get a complete understanding of what the 14th Amendment was really all about. Let's see if this article talks about slavery. So, they say the 14th Amendment is known as a Reconstruction Amendment because it was added to the Constitution after the Civil War in 1868. And now we all know that the main reason the Civil War was fought was slavery. It had a lot to do with slavery. Not all, but a lot to do with slavery. Not immigration, not illegal immigration. That places it at an important historical crossroad. When lingering wounds of divisiveness and animosity still plague the nation, and the reality of post-slavery America begged contentious racial and social questions. Now that's very good. Post-slavery. There's the word, slavery. Again, the 14th Amendment had everything to do with slavery. Black people. Thomas Jefferson said men were created equal, but the original Constitution betrayed that promise by allowing for slavery. This is according to Jeffrey Rosen. The 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendments were designed to enshrine Lincoln's promise of a new America. The amendment's first section begins, however, as so often is the case, this reaffirmed American ideal fell short of reality. Yeah, as relates to black people. No other people, black people. Rosen notes that issues of civil rights and equal treatment continue to be denied to African Americans. True. And then he also said LGBT people. Not true. If you were LGBT and you were white, you had the same rights as all other white people. Now, at that time, you didn't have people out there just openly showing, I'm gay, I'm lesbian. No. You did not have that. So Rosen goes on to say LGBT people and other citizens for more than a century after the amendment's ratification. The amendment said nothing, absolutely nothing about LGBT, said nothing about illegal immigration, said nothing about any of that. It was all about slavery. And Erica Lee points out that Native Americans were not even allowed to become citizens until 1925. Even as these amendments were written, obviously there were major built-in inequalities and maybe at the time were not intended to apply to everyone. This is according to Lee. So the question of why was citizenship by birthright such an important concept? Rosen says citizenship was a central question left open by the original Constitution. At the time it was written, the Constitution assumed citizenship, but it did not provide any rules for it. In the infamous Dred Scott decision, and the Chief Justice said African Americans cannot be citizens of the United States and had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Once again, you see, it's talking about black people. You're not going to see that 14th Amendment talk anything about illegal immigration. Nothing, not a thing. The birthright part of the 14th Amendment had everything to do with children who were born of people who had been enslaved in this country. Not people who were coming across the border illegally. No. The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in the Dred Scott case named for a slave who unsuccessfully sued for his freedom has since been widely condemned. The 14th Amendment was designed to overturn this decision and define citizenship once and for all. But for who? Enslaved people, not illegal immigrants, not those who come into this country from China or wherever, a woman or female who's pregnant to have a baby here so that the baby is born and becomes a citizen of the United States. It had nothing, the 14th Amendment that is, had nothing to do with that. Rosen goes on to say it is really important that it's a vision of citizenship based on land rather than blood. Well, land rather than blood. 14th Amendment had everything, once again, to do with enslaved people, people who had been enslaved in the United States, and their children who would be born of those people who had been enslaved. It is an idea that anyone can be an American if they commit themselves to our constitutional values. Well, yeah, so long as they follow the law, they're not here illegally. So the question, what does it mean to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof? According to Rosen, this is one of the greatest questions of citizenship. There are two clear examples of people not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Diplomats, for example, and their children. And at the time of the 14th Amendment, Native Americans, who were not recognized as a part of the American populace. Okay, but the 14th Amendment, once again, had everything to do with black people, not Native Americans, because you don't see black people who were enslaved, descendants of slaves, being given reservation land, being given any of that. You don't see any of that. You saw Joe Biden really running out among the Native American tribes in California, giving away things. You don't see him, and you didn't see him doing that as it relates to African Americans. You didn't see that. So if you're going to compare African Americans and Native Americans relative to the 14th Amendment, well, let's compare the whole damn thing. With those two exceptions, everyone who was physically present in the United States was brought to be under its jurisdiction. Okay. So they named African Americans. They named Native Americans. Where is this LGBT named at in this? It's not there. There are numerous Supreme Court cases that affirm that understanding, and almost as importantly, there are a lot of congressional statutes that assume birthright citizenship. Assume is the big word. Assume. Again, what was the 14th Amendment about? It was centered around slavery. Not Native American situation, not LGBTQ situation, slavery. Some scholars like John Eastman of the Claremont Institute's Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence have argued that children of undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and thus should not be considered citizens under the Constitution. Well, John Eastman is correct because the 14th Amendment had nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with illegal immigration and their children. Whether their children were born here in the United States or whether they were born outside the United States but brought here by their parents or others illegally. But Rosen says this is a minority view among constitutional scholars of all political backgrounds. Well, we're not measuring this to see what the majority thinks, what the minority thinks about this. We're looking at it based upon what the 14th Amendment actually was and is. While the Supreme Court has not explicitly ruled on the issue of children of undocumented immigrants, Congress has passed all kinds of laws presuming their citizenship. Well, presuming is not really saying that they're citizens. It's presuming. There's no conclusion that they are citizens. What is the connection between birthright citizenship and immigration? In 1898, 30 years after the 14th Amendment was adopted, the Supreme Court reached a defining decision in a case known as the United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Lee explains that Wong Kim Ark was the American-born son of Chinese immigrants. Asian immigrants were the first immigrants to the United States that could not be considered white. This is according to Lee. So they are treated differently. They are taxed differently. They are stripped of many rights. In the 1880s, they are excluded from immigration and barred from citizenship. But the 14th Amendment had nothing to do with them. So the main question of the case was, could a person born in America be a citizen in a place where his parents could not be as well? You know, this is the anchor baby question. You know, where you have pregnant women who come here to the United States, give birth to their baby here in the United States, and maybe they go on back to whatever country they came from, China or wherever. The Supreme Court decided yes, and the case remains the first defining legal decision made under the banner of birthright citizenship. So, the Supreme Court's decision said that the right of citizenship is not a matter of inheritance, that it never descends from generation to generation. It is related to where you are born. This is according to Lee. It is about the power of the place. That has been a very expansive and at the time a corrective measure to a more exclusionary definition, both legally as well as culturally, as to what an American is. So, the question, why must it be stated that the privileges of citizenship need to be protected? Before the Civil War, states did not necessarily have to follow the provisions stated in the Bill of Rights. Only Congress had to follow those. The 14th Amendment changed that. This second sentence of the amendment means that states have to respect the Bill of Rights as well as basic civil rights and the rights that come along with citizenship. Okay, so the federal government having more authority as relates to citizenship than the various states. In other words, it could not be helter-skelter between the states and the federal government related to citizenship. The idea, Rosen said, was that there were rights that were so basic, so integral to citizenship that they could not be narrowed by the states. In other words, the federal government would dictate what those rights and the interpretation of those laws, the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. Despite the promises and protections of citizenship, Lee says it is abundantly clear that different racial groups were and often are seen as unable or unworthy to function as true American citizens. After all, basic rights of citizenship, like suffrage and equal treatment, were denied certain racial groups for 100 years after the 14th Amendment. Now again, what was the 14th Amendment? What was it intended for? It was about slavery. It was about children born of people who had been enslaved. In other words, if these people are citizens, the children grow up and are citizens too. That means they can vote. That means they can have congressional representation. The idea of a law applying to all people seems to be clear. But in reality, the debate and the laws and the practices that get established are very much based on a hierarchy of, well, sure, all persons, but some are more fit and some are more deserving than others. Now, okay, all right, well, no. Again, 14th Amendment was about slavery, was about children born of people who had been enslaved by this country. Throughout history, Asian immigrants, Mexican immigrants, Muslim immigrants, and their children, to name a few, have had unspoken cultural caveats applied to their ability to be Americans. Well, for well over 100 years, Muslims have become citizens, Mexicans have become citizens, Asians have become citizens, but I'm talking about those who did it through the legal route. But today what we have these mainly Democrats who are pushing and promoting the citizenship for illegal immigrants and encouraging more millions of them to enter the United States and become citizens and vote for Democrats. So the article goes on to say, for Asian immigrants, the racial argument at the time was that it did not matter whether you were born in the United States or not. Asians as a race are unassimilable. They cannot assimilate, in other words. Well, that's not true. They are diametrically opposite from us, Americans. Well, that's not the case. And they're distorting the argument with regards to the 14th Amendment. They're distorting it. Asians have no problems becoming citizens in the United States today. No problem at all. It's just that we're talking about illegal immigration. That was the argument that was used to intern Japanese citizens. No. The argument to intern Japanese citizens had to do with the war at that time. Had nothing to do with them being here illegally. They were citizens. Most of those who were interned, Japanese, and a lot of them were even Chinese, who were put in those camps. It was related to that doggone war that was going on. Had nothing to do with assimilation, had nothing to do with the 14th Amendment. It was the denial of citizenship in favor of race. And no. It had to do with the war. Okay, You're fighting against Japanese? Oh, well, what these idiots did, white America, they rounded up a lot of Japanese and put them into internment camps. Rounded up Chinese. Some of them were Chinese even. Put them in internment camps. So the ability to become American, the ability to assimilate, they just did not have it. It had nothing to do with assimilation. Nothing. Bad example. But you see, this is the type of garbage that they push and promote at you and think that most of you are going to swallow it. And unfortunately, most of you do. So the question, why was it important to legalize rights for non-citizens? All right, now remember now, the 14th Amendment, I have to keep reminding you of this. It was all about black people, enslaved people, and the children who would be born of these enslaved people. So far, we've covered the first clause, the citizenship clause, and the second, the privileges and immunities clause. These both deal with American citizens. The final clauses, the due process clause and the equal protection clause, are a little different and deal with the rights of all people in the United States. Well, okay, yeah. With that, you can't just treat illegal immigrants like insects. You can't do that. Okay, you got human rights. You got human dignity. You cannot do that. All right? Because that is exactly how they treated, in most instances, black people in America. You know, of course, they treated Native Americans very badly. Yes, they did. So the eagle-eyed Constitution readers will notice that the 14th Amendment contains a due process clause very similar to the 5th Amendment. This says, Rosen says, was a technical addition to ensure the 5th Amendment was not theoretically narrowed down to protect only American citizens. Yeah, and that's good. In the 14th Amendment, they threw that in there. And that's good because you can't just mistreat people. There needs to be a due process clause. Okay? You can't do that. So the 14th, you shouldn't do it. The 14th Amendment distinguishes between the privileges of the citizenship and the privileges of all people. This is according to Rosen. The framers of the amendment thought there were certain rights that were so important that they should be extended to all persons, and in order to specify that, they needed a due process clause. But what was not to be extended to all people was citizenship. I say again, what was not to be extended to all people through the due process clause was citizenship. So the question, what does it mean to have equal protection of the law? At the time following the Civil War, at its core, remember why the Civil War was fought? Remember that now. The primary driver of the Civil War in the United States was slavery. Black people. It meant all persons had the right to be protected by the police. That the laws of the country should protect all people. This is according to Rosen. That's good. That's good. That's good. You shouldn't mistreat illegal immigrants. No, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't beat them. You should not enslave them. You should not commit fraud against them. That's what the Equal Protection Clause is all about. But again, it had nothing to do with this whole birthright citizenship. The anchor baby nonsense. Nothing. In the 20th century, more broader questions were litigated under the 14th Amendment, like Brown versus Board of Education, where the segregation was constitutional. Cases involving the internment of the Japanese citizens, cases from the marriage equality decisions, even Roe v. Wade, have strands of equal protection language and invoke due process law. Another interesting case. Now, you know Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court threw that out a few years ago. They threw it out. Of course, the Democrats, they were really pissed off about that. They're still pissed off about that. Another interesting case that speaks directly to the immigration side of the 14th Amendment debate is the 1982 case of Plyler versus Doe, in which the Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional for the state of Texas to deny funding for undocumented immigrant children. All right. Funding for undocumented immigrant children. Okay. Again, what we have here, and this ties into this whole birthright thing, the anchor baby thing or situation, where you overflow the system with illegal immigrant children. You push that, and you push that, and you push that. And this is what's happening. So now the question, why are we talking about all this right now? Trump signed a flurry of executive actions Monday on his first day back in the White House, including ending birthright citizenship. Because the right is enshrined in the Constitution, any change would need to be addressed via a constitutional amendment or through the courts. But Trump's interest in repealing the birthright citizenship is not a new idea. He mentioned it 7 years ago during his first term. And Lee also says that for the last 30 years or so, there have been several overtures by the political right to explore citizenship reform, a timeline that she says aligns with the ascendancy of modern American conservatism. Lee fears if the current push to end birthright citizenship is successful, it could have wider implications than most people assume. People from other countries who are here legally are work or student visas. They are on work or student visas, for instance, could have children who do not legally belong to the only country they know. Well, if they have children, their children should not be a citizen, even though they were born here in this country. Why? Because the 14th Amendment, that whole birthright, had to do only with slavery. Those who were born, the children who were born through the slavery. Now, the liberals have twisted that and made it appear today that any child born in America, they're automatically citizens of the United States. No, that is not what the 14th Amendment was about. That is not what the 14th Amendment was talking about. There have been attempts since the 1990s to break away birth citizenship or narrow it down, and it did not seem that they would have a chance at succeeding until now. To me, Lee says, this now only reflects the ascendancy of an extreme right position, but also a return to a very narrow and exclusionary definition of Americanness. Okay, so that's the conclusion of the CNN article, and we knew that they would come to that conclusion because that's what CNN and its talking heads are all about. But again, I conclude by saying this. The 14th Amendment had everything to do with slavery. Even the due process part had everything to do with slavery as well, because what it was saying is that you cannot mistreat these people. What people? Well, it was the black people. You can't mistreat them. You can't do that. They have to have due process in law. The police can't do this without due process. There has to be a legal process for all the things that the state perpetrate upon these people. This is T. West, Afro Strategy News.